Hello and welcome. My name is Emma Rose Lin, and we are in studio today with Professor Xiaobo Su. Xiaobo is a geographer and a scholar of political economy at the University of Oregon, whose research interrogates how urban development, heritage commodification, and border politics reshape everyday lives in China and Southeast Asia. His recent work explores themes like state-led investment strategies, smuggling and sovereignty at border crossings, and how tourism alters local landscapes and identities. Welcome, Xiaobo. We're so grateful to have you with us here in studio today.
Thank you, Emma.
It's really a delight. And I have to tell our listeners that in studio today, we are actually enjoying a cup of tea together because, Xiaobo, you've written previously about something that you call the tastes of well-being. And I wanted to read a quote from one of your articles, and I wonder if you could kind of help us understand what you're seeing and what you're pointing to here. So in your writing, you say, the tastes of well-being are threefold: spatially, building closeness to nature; temporally, slowing down to taste tea and thus enjoy a different rhythm of life; and socially, building connection with hosts and other tourists through tea's conversations. The emphasis on tastescape offers a valuable means to understand well-being as the outcome of interactions that happen in the time-space of tourism through the dynamic interplay of tourists, tea, and socio-natural environments. So, in your writing here, you're talking specifically about people drinking tea and participating in tourism. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience there and what you have learned?
Thank you, Emma. I think tea is a very important part of culture in East Asia, in China, as well as in Japan and South Korea and some countries in Southeast Asia. So when I did my field work in a very small town in Yunnan, the town's name is called Lijiang. It's a heritage site. So when I did a field work, and most of the time I interview my respondents around the tea table. And so we just like here, the setting here, we drink tea and then I ask them questions. And sometimes I didn't ask them any question, they automatically tell me a story. They wanted to tell their story, personal stories to me. And overall, you can find many people, they always get together. It's different from coffee. When you drink coffee, rarely I think, you can say, I can drink one cup of coffee with someone for over a whole day. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's quite strange, But for tea, if you don't want to go out, you want to stay in the guest house, you can stay around the table with someone. You can sit around the table for a whole day. Sometimes I ask them, why you want to drink tea here in Lijiang? I mean, as you can find in my reading, and people will say, yeah, I can taste the tea or drink tea in Beijing, in Guangzhou or Shenzhen, whatever big cities in China. The difference is because looks like, only in the town, in the tourist area, they feel relaxed, they can stay, they simply just want to waste their time. Of course, they feel very relaxed. So then I interview them, I ask them why you want to drink tea, or what is the meaning of tea to you. And the geographer, of course, I want to decode those messages. So that's why I put forward the 3 dimensions, spatially, temporally, and socially. And then they drink, hang out with people, and tea is mainly the mechanism of socialization to allow people to have something to do, but mostly it's actually they want to talk to each other.
Right.
But they have a reason why you want to sit down here, because we want to drink tea, and then let's drink tea together. Of course, you cannot always drink tea, you have to talk to others. So tea is a very cool kind of for me, I think that's the entry point to understand how people socialize with unfamiliar people. They don't know each other, by the way. They just, by coincidence, they sit around one table and talk to each other.
Wow. So it's like tea is kind of the connecting force, and it creates this kind of common space that you actually end up meeting strangers, new family members, visitors, and you all get to kind of spend time together and share stories.
Yes.
So you were there doing research. Was your research connected to tea, or did this come about as a result of kind of another project that you were pursuing at the time?
Well, of course, my main focus is not on tea itself.
Right.
I'm not a tea expert, but the reason I'm very interested in tea is because I want to figure out how people, why you want to come here to talk to unfamiliar person. They don't know each other. I mean, you can do the same thing supposedly in your old home place, right? And then came to this small place, and then you really open your mind and talk to each other. So something played a very important role. Of course, it's not alcohol. It's not occasionally it's coffee, but tea is definitely the main one.
So you're a human geographer. How would you describe what human geography is and how you study it to someone who has maybe never heard that term before? How would you describe the field?
Geography is about human environmental interaction. So some of my colleagues, they pay more attention to environment, particularly natural environment. And the environmental change is a kind of so-called reflection of human activities. And for me, I'm a human geographer. I pay more attention to human side. And of course, I also want to look at the interaction between human being and the landscape, either so-called natural landscape or built landscape. Natural landscape is normally called mountains, trees, and those natural environment. And the built landscape is what we see cities, high-rise buildings and roads and infrastructure and all those things. So we, as a human being, we have no choice about to interact with all our surroundings, including natural and built landscapes. So we use all kinds of methods, the qualitative and the quantitative methods. But me, myself, I mostly use participator observation and in-depth interview to figure out how people interact with their surroundings and people interact with other people.
Wow. So you're really interviewing people and then looking for commonalities in how they're interacting with their environments and how that kind of shapes the decisions they make, the lives they lead.
It's not only about the similarity or the commonality, but also about the difference. And difference makes our research very interesting. Of course, we want to find some generalized pattern, but always we found, one place is different from another place, and one people is different from another people, and even one person is different from themselves in a different place. So that's something I think we found that interesting about the place and space and the regions, all those some very key terms in human geography. Again, I just want to say this is not a one-way traffic and someone influenced, but this is a mutual interaction and they influence each other.
It makes sense to me in a certain way that you would look for kind of the spaces that people gather and then look for how they're interacting with the spaces. And I was also really touched by one of the papers that I came across that you wrote that dealt with themes of home. And specifically, it dealt with belonging and the concept of home in really highly impacted communities like sex work industry. And in these spaces, you make the case that home, it's not necessarily experienced as one stable location, but instead you reframe the concept of home as, quote, a liminal space of ambivalent experiences that revolve around dichotomous distinctions between privacy and publicity, friendship and segregation, marginalization and belonging. And I actually have chills just reading that definition right now. And it really struck me because it feels to me like this reframe or kind of offering a sense of home through someone's experience, even if their home isn't necessarily a stable location, it's a very dignified way of engaging with a person in their lived experience and their reality. Would you be willing to share kind of a little bit, or maybe a story of kind of how that research came to develop and what you learned about home in that process?
Well, home is a very important term, not only just to human geography, but also to pretty much everyone, not only just the human being, but I think even animals, they also have a sense of home. But one thing I really want to emphasize, more often than not, people mix home and housing, and home is quite different from housing. Some people are housed, they have a property, they live in they have a dorm, but they may not feel a sense of home. And the typical case is those victims of domestic violence. And you never, even they are housed, but you ask them, do you feel comfortable or secure? And they always know, I feel so fearful in this place because, some people it's going to attack her, normally or called a female. And then some people, they don't have a house or they don't have a property, but not necessarily mean they can define as homeless. Even for those people who live on streets and they still have a sense of home, it's not, this kind of sense does not come from their own physical property, like a house or a dorm or something. It's because they have a community, they support each other, and they feel very comfortable to hang out with their friends or other fellows. In my own writing, I never use homeless referred, it's a cultural term. It's not a related to property or house. I would rather say those people who actually live on the street is called houseless, right? They don't have a house. It's true. But if you feel, if you think you don't have a sense of home, that's called homeless. So that's what I'm trying to distinguish. Otherwise, I think in our media, always put those two together. And we see, the home price is actually house price. It's not a home. Home has no price. I mean, it's invaluable to everyone. Then specifically to the research, just mention. To be frank, I didn't do the interview with those and the sex works in Dongguan. I collaborate with a group of scholars from South China Normal University, two female scholars, and one of them had a chance to interview high-end sex works. So for those high-end sex works in Dongguan at that time, they earn a lot of money because of their profession, their job, and of course, they always struggle in the context of Chinese society. They were implicated in such a business. It's very hard for them to return back to normal life if everyone knows what they have done before, and it's pretty hard. So they, of course, as a human being, and particularly female individuals, they dream for a normal life, which means they have a sense of home. It's not only just the property, but with some other people. They can either their parents, their family members, or their significant others. Even they dream one day they have their own children and they can just live a normal life. But as we all know, as long as you step into this sex industry, it's extremely hard for them to forget the history they had, and then they say, look, I just like a normal person. It's pretty hard, but particularly in the context of China.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I'm hearing almost as you're sharing that, I'm hearing home both as an extension of oneself into one's community, like home being the people that I'm connected to, the friends that I have, the social network that I have, and how we support one another, even in contexts of instability. And then I'm also hearing like home as a dream, like dreaming into a life that you want to lead, even in difficult situations and circumstances. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I just feel like a lot of people might resonate with that idea, especially because in so many communities we live here in Eugene, and there's an enormous population that does not have a stable housing situation, and offering this idea to the larger consciousness, the larger audience and community, that this idea of home can be much greater than the physical location that one finds themselves in. And yeah, I find that really beautiful. Thank you. So in some of your work, it seems like you're looking at how power functions specifically in like really highly complex regions, like transnational border regions. And you've specifically done some research around the border between China and Myanmar. You've identified 3 modes of governance of how power functions in these spaces. So there's active cooperations, acquiescence, and compromise. Could you define each of those for me and how they manifest? What does active cooperation look like in a space like this?
Okay, so this is basically about different models of political interaction among different groups of people. And of course, we refer to border, but it's basically you can find everywhere. So first of all, I want to emphasize my own kind of the conceptual framework about politics is heavily influenced by Antonio Gramsci, and who was a former Italian communist leader and was in prison for over 10 years. So it's one of the most famous books called Selections of Prison Notebooks. I read the book many times. And he talked about hegemony and compromise. And when I look at the politics, I think my framework is heavily influenced by Gramsci, which is from my perspective, is a great scholar. So again, I want to say, in a regular society, we are not talking about what happened in northern Myanmar. It's quite different. Just a regular society, when people interact with each other for political terms. And the most important one normally is we have to collaborate with each other, right? We have to collaborate. Otherwise, I think, there's no way for us to move forward. If we always fight against each other, if we always resist, I think, the price of doing something is very, very high. So that's, from my perspective, it's very key. And then let's go specifically for people in the less powerful position, or sometimes we call it weak, the less powerful or the subordinated. And their choice is, of course, on one hand, they have to collaborate. And of course, they can choose to resist the powerful. And more often than not, they actually say, look, I'm going to comply with. I know it's unfair to me, but I think it's okay, it's acceptable. And I wanted to comply with it a little bit. And then to reach certain balance, and then we can move forward.
Can you give an example of that? Like when you've seen someone make that kind of pivot or like that decision where they're kind of like, okay, I recognize the odds here, and this is actually a circumstance in which I'm gonna go with it because I'm in the position of less power, but that's actually how am I understanding you correctly?
You can, of course, this is one example. And then, for instance, let's use the United States as one example because we are quite familiar with. Now we have the ICE engine everywhere. And then for those people who may not have appropriate documents, and they say, look, of course, I have to retreat into my own space. I don't want to go to the street. I don't want to go to any public space to avoid any confrontation, although this will cause much trouble to their everyday life because it's very hard for them to make a living. So that's one. It's when someone basically will say, look, I'm going to hold something, I want to fight against ICE engine, I want to do something against them. But of course, we can go to the street to demonstrate. That's just one way. But more often than not, for those people who go to the street to demonstrate because they have a American passport.
Right.
But if you don't have American passport, how dare you can go?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one.
I see. Okay.
And then the third one is from the perspective of the powerful one, right? Those people at the top, and they have all those resources. Of course, they can say, I'm going to strengthen my dominance over you. I want to squeeze whatever you have out of your body and then put it in my pocket. That's what. But more often than not, I think the political leaders say, I'm going to make some compromise. I want to give you something to make material concession to you in exchange for your consent to my leadership. So that's why I talk about these three models in my own reading. That's pretty much like the game of the political game you can find everywhere. So, but mostly I think in our own research, we typically want to focus on domination and resistance. But for me, I think it's this binary thinking simplifies real politics.
Yeah. Okay. That's what kind of interested me about it. I was like, this doesn't seem like a binary framework. And I feel like it's different than what I've maybe heard before or seen in the news or the way that I've maybe been taught to think about it. And so I'm wondering, has the research developed from that place? Do we have a sense of kind of like in these three different models of how power might manifest, what the impacts are on communities, or if there's a government that tends to prioritize like active cooperation versus tends to do more of a power over dominant, looking for compliance kind of mechanism, like what tends to happen or how those dynamics tend to play out in communities?
Well, this is a very important question. So, of course, both sides, it's not only just both, on multiple sides. As long as we think about the power relation, always we can find someone is in the privileged or the relatively powerful position, someone is in the less powerful position. Easily we can figure out this kind of power imbalance. So in this case, I think the key question is, what is the price you want to pay? We can have sometimes we call the authoritarian society, and the government looks like it exercise very strong control over society, but eventually still want to make a compromise with the society. And the individuals, they have to comply with it. Otherwise, I think they can choose, say, look, I don't want to live here anymore. I want to migrate to a different country to choose a different life. But whatever place they want to go, they still face in this kind of power networks. It's inevitable because this is a human society. And even in animal groups, they also have this kind of power imbalance. It's everywhere. So what I'm trying to describe in my own research is, look, Gramsci tells us, hegemony is not only about coercion, which is sheer domination. It's also about consent. The less powerful pay consent to the powerful. Then the problem is how to mobilize the less powerful to pay consent to you. And of course, you can exploit them and force them and brainwash them and do whatever you want and eventually say, look, I comply with whatever, I don't care. But more often than not, the price doing this is very high and you make a concession. And the very typical example, I think, in the United States, this is during the so-called welfare system in the United States. The capitalist class simply say, look, we are going to provide social welfare to working class in exchange for your support to our leadership so we can compete with the Soviet Union as a way to show our advantage, the capitalism advantage.
So within this context that we're kind of exploring here, you've also studied smuggling and specifically how economies of smuggling are used to exercise sovereignty within political landscapes. Could you describe kind of how you came to see that and what does that look like on the ground? Like how do people use smuggling and what is the function of it within a political landscape?
Well, of course, I think smuggling is the formal term we describe certain activities which always escape from the supervision of the government. If we go to border, either in United States between US and Mexico, US and Canada, and then my own case, China and Myanmar border, smuggling, or we can use another term called informal economy. So we have to recognize this kind of informal economy over border real existence in the border society, cross-border society. It's not something it's new, but it has there for centuries, I think, particularly between China and Myanmar, and then, and then we have to recognize it, and then we started why people want to smuggle, and then to see different power groups. And in my own case, it's those law enforcement representing the central government, which means the immigration authority and the customs authority, and they represent the central government in China. And their duty is to enforce legal and formal control over border, and they want to disencourage sometimes to prevent the smuggling. Mm-hmm. But for local people, either ordinary people or the business traders, the informal economy, they get something from Myanmar and send something to Myanmar. It's a very natural way of their business.
I see.
So, I mean, before pandemic, I think this kind of what called smuggling, it's huge business, and many people actually benefit a lot. And then local economy was so booming, and people always took it for granted. And we're going to continue to make money from this kind of the cross-border trade. And then after the pandemic, I went to the border, and people complain because the central government enforced a very strict control, and it's pretty hard for people to send the goods to Myanmar and then bring goods from Myanmar to China, so they complain a lot.
They're like, you're disrupting my entire way of life.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I'm hearing what you're saying too, is that it occurs as a very natural idea for for everyday people who are like, this is how I get my needs met. Like, this is how I sell my goods. This is just like how it happens. And I'm maybe less involved in the government, or I don't like have close ties or whatever it is. And so it doesn't make sense to me that this is just like how we do it. This is how we do business. But there was a big tightening down in the pandemic. Is there a barter economy still? Like, is that like shrinking? What's happened now?
It has been shrinking very much because it's not only, before the pandemic, we see there was a border, but there was no fence. And it's very natural. People cross border without any hindrance. You can just easily go from this side to the other side. And people sometimes cannot realize you actually cross border. I mean, it's an invisible borderline. And then during the pandemic, the Chinese government established very high fence, and extremely hard for people to easily cross the border now.
Wow. Yeah. Have people gotten more creative in order to get across?
It all depends on how much, the value of the goods. So I heard some stories, people use drone to traffic heroin from Myanmar to China because,
Yeah, high value.
Yeah, high value. And then for some low value, and it's not necessary. So it creates some problems in this moment. And then I think they're continuing in this negotiation between the central government and the local governments, and trying to figure out a reasonable way to maintain national sovereignty upon the border, but still to support local economic development.
So this just occurred to me, but like, as a human geographer, when you're drinking tea with people and you're gathering these stories, how do you factor out your own bias in what you're listening for in a story?
Wow, that's a very critical question, I think. It's not only just for human geographer, for many social scientists who engage in qualitative research. For me, if I actually do fieldwork, interview people, it's not like here we just want to have some kind of so-called communication. Interview for me is a real, very tough thing, because I take some notes and think, why you want to say this? What is your underlying message you want to tell me? And I took notes, and then I always ask myself, did I miss anything? And then if I miss anything, I need to go back to some sentence, people might respond told me, and I need to ask again and again. And that's the first. The other one is I also keep thinking, what this story, if there's a story or this piece of information, tell me something about my conceptual framework. And then I have to basically to identify that this is something I can talk about, relate to my argument. For instance, I want to emphasize, and it's not, border control is not a top-down approach from the central government, and then the local governments have no choice but to completely comply with those orders. But then the reality is that when I interview those government officials, I found they have all kinds of the way try to evade this kind of the order. So I now have to link this information back to my conceptual framework and think how this can help me to strengthen my argument.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. That actually helps clarify it for me. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the music industry. I'm a musician myself. I love music. I love to sing. And when I'm in conversation with musicians, a lot of it's about culture and identity. And you've done some research about how music intersects with cultural identity. What power do musicians have in shaping cultural narratives? What are you looking for? And how real is that power?
Music is a very important part of an ethnic culture in my case, which is Lijiang in Yunnan province in China. The first time I think I went to Lijiang 2002, I noticed many people in their 50s and 60s played local music. Normally we define it as just the overall, it's called Lash music, it's ethnic music. They have very different music instrument played. So when I actually used to study tourism development, interact with a group of musicians. Some of them, at that time, I think, they're trying to figure out how they can survive in the process of tourism development. For two reasons. The first of all, of course, they have to make a living. They need to figure out how to perform music to attract tourists and then to get some money. And the second one is they always emphasize it's necessary to attract the local young people, large young people, either male and females, to learn how to play it. So they can pass their own ethnic culture from one generation to next generation. So to make it happen, of course, the most important thing is to make people to believe if you can play music, you can make a living. Mm-hmm. It's not for hobby. It's actually for living. And then they can attract young people to join the music and then to perform for tourists, and they can make money.
So this is one of the ways that the cultural art form is actually evolving, is that some of the mindsets around what the function of the music. I can relate to this from my own experience. I grew up in a kind of a folk tradition, but more studied classical music when I entered academia and school, and that's where I've made my living as a performer. That's kind of what I hear you saying, is that musicians are now thinking about music not only as a cultural heritage, but also having to kind of structure it, frame it within capitalism as like a realistic means to an end of a way to make a living. And so they're engaging in the tourism industry in order to kind of make that real, make that happen, make it feasible for younger musicians to make a living. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that's true, because everyone knows that, this music is for tourists. It's not only just for themselves, also for tourists. Without the tourists, I think, the music cannot be passed from one generation to the next generation. That's why I talk about the commodification of ethnic music. We have to understand, at least from my perspective, music is very natural. It's not a necessity. If there's no tourism, and what we see today in Lijiang, it's all gone.
Right.
It's all gone. So then we have to understand what is the most important. Yes, it's commodified music or it's winning music. Which one we want?
Right. It's kind of the lesser of two evils in some ways. It's like, do you want the musical tradition to continue at all? Well, then we have to embrace reality that we need tourism in order for it to be a viable career path.
Exactly.
Okay. I feel like I have had so many conversations with musicians who come to exactly that kind of moment or turning point where they're like, well, we just have to kind of learn how to make a living in some way. And that's the reality of how it is because of the world that we live in. So thank you for sharing that. It's interesting noticing the connection with cultural heritage and like an entire music scene and ethnic culture. I think that's just really insightful, and I appreciate you sharing. I wanted to turn the topic also to your current research. You're looking into and focusing on urban state venturism. And I was wondering, for any of our listeners who are students who are maybe considering human geography or are interested in this and want to come to the U of O to study with Professor Su, how do you go about choosing a new research topic? And what do you look for? How do you know that you're kind of on to something? When do you know when you're on to something? And what kinds of data are you paying attention to? Because I think one of the things that occurs to me is when you're studying something like human geography, the field is so vast. You could look at almost any aspect of human behavior and how they interact with their environments and go in so many different directions. Do you have any advice for younger geography students or people designing a project that you've learned in your own experience of how you know when you're really on to something and kind of want to follow a thread?
I think the beauty of geography is you can study pretty much everything from animal to trees to mountains to human beings and pretty much everything, because whatever we see, it definitely, as Emma you mentioned, happen in certain space.
Mm-hmm.
Even people now, we want to go to the space station, it's still a space. If you go to the moon, it's still a space, right? It's just different types of space. And we was, whatever where we always interact with this kind of surrounding. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So that's why we say, as a geographer, you can study whatever you're interested in. So then, as the question you just mentioned, I think there are two very important aspects I want to highlight. First one, nowadays geography is really embracing high technology, and we have the GeoAI and machine learning and modeling and all those things. We really want to take advantage of location-based service and the information to generate some patterns about human behavior, and then this is pretty important. We even can map, the behavior on those animals, because as long as we have their time-space information, we can simply use software to show what they are doing now and where, and then what's going to happen next. I think that's the very important part of geography. So we embrace today, for geographers, we embrace high technology, spatial technology to understand our world.
So based on some of these studies that you've done, human geographers are developing models to kind of predict what human behavior, what might happen using artificial intelligence and different high technology models.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, still ongoing research. I collaborate with a computer scientist and economist. We are trying to figure out, there's a called SBIR program from the Department of Commerce in United States. So from 1981, SBIR program, they continue to invest in small business. And we have a whole bunch of data on their investment record. And we can use this one actually to see what happened in the past. And then hopefully we can predict, what kind of sectors and what kind of place and the SBIR express strong interest in other sectors or in other places. So this is something I think we can do. It's not very hard. I think it's feasible. So that's the one thing I want to emphasize. The second aspect about the geography is very intertwined between the real space, the physical, and then the digital space. And think about today how much we spend time on our cell phone, the social media, and then we create multiple selves in the world, and it's not just a real one in reality here now. And then we can play the multiple roles through our cell phone, our social media, and then just talk to different people with different identities. And so this is also create some very cool topics for us as geography, because this is all about space. I mean, it's just the real one and the digital one.
Yeah.
And space is about the social relations created by individuals to form certain kind of environments in which we perform. So, for geography majors, I think on one hand, they can become highly driven, tech savvy, and then have a lot of job opportunities, because now big companies, they all have the so-called geography information science departments because they really want to take advantage of their data.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple and Google or Facebook, they all have big one because if I have accurate information on my customers in terms of their location, in terms of their time, I pretty much know everything about this person. I mean, it's very simple.
Wow, that's the superpower of the human geographers. You guys are working with GIS, and you can tell and predict human behavior in a way that's like incredibly marketable.
Yeah, the other one is also about ourselves. I mean, the tight intertwine between digital and the real space. I think I just don't know because now we have a ChatGPT. If you ask ChatGPT and who is Xiaobo Su, will provide some information about itself. But every day the information is different because ChatGPT is trying to grab information from all over sources and then, it's learning and then learning about you and provide something about itself.
Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you so much, Xiaobo. It's been an absolute pleasure. We have a couple quick fire questions. Would you be up for a quick fire?
Sure.
Okay. What advice would you give to human geography students entering your field?
Today, I think it's very important to get some hard skills such as statistics and remote sensing and jazz science. I think that's quite necessary.
Since you've studied music, what's the music that most feels like home to you?
For me, I think the most I feel a sense of comfort is very slow, some background music, BGM, slow and without very not noise, and to make myself calm down. I think that's my type.
Almost like music therapy, like using music as a tool for focus. Is there a practice or something that you do when you're traveling because you travel a lot for your research, to create a sense of home wherever you go?
Well, I think, I always try my best to make myself as comfortable as possible. I always travel between China and the United States, which gave me a very interesting way to try different lifestyles in both countries because they are quite different by all means. As long as I want to do my field work, I think I'm a professional. No matter how hard my living condition is, I just accept that there's no any complaint. I come here for work. It's not for enjoyment.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite go-to tea or tea shop, either in China or in the United States, that you want to recommend?
In United States, so I don't know very much. Of course, you can go to Cafe Roma and pull out a bag of tea, but for me, this kind of tea powder, it's basically has different flavor. But in China, and then I just basically stay at home if I have time, and my wife, if she has time, then we just drink tea together. And then sometimes I also drink beer. I think that's whatever I have. Just again, I just want to make self calm down, run, and just feel so excited about something. I think that's not necessary.
It's more about the calm and the atmosphere that you get to create together.
Yes, calmness.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I wonder if I might read a poem real quick to end our time together. So this is a poem from Honor the Messenger by Kim Stafford. Champion the enemy's need. Ask about your enemy's wounds and scars. Seek their hidden cause of trouble. Feed your enemy's children. Learn their word for home. Repair their well. Learn their sorrow's history. Trace their lineage of the good. Ask them for a song. Make tea. Bake bread.
Oh, that's very beautiful.
Thank you so much, Professor Xiaobo Su. We're just delighted to have you and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our student producer, Ellie Johnson. Thank you to the director of the Global Studies Institute, Ellie Vandergrift, and our GSI team members, Megan Bogart and Hadil Abdelmaid. Thank you to Dean and Vice Provost of the Division of Global Engagement, Dennis Galvan, for your support and your encouragement throughout this project. Thank you to Sam Para for your work on the podcast artwork, as well as marketing and communications support. Thank you to our sound design and audio mastering interns, Journey Brinson and Julian Green. Thank you to the SOJC production studio, especially John Sharpie. Major thanks to composer Joe Kai, who composed our Global Hearth theme song. Many thanks to John Bologna, Charlie Dietz, Steve Rogers, Christopher Deredix, Peter Laufer, and Chris Chavez, and the Don't Shoot the Journalist team for concept development support. Thank you to former Oregon Poet Laureate Kim Stafford for your beautiful poetry. And most of all, thank you to you, our listeners, for your time and your caring attention. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can follow us on social media. We'll link it in the show notes. Please send any questions or comments to gsi@uoregon.edu. That's gsi@uoregon.edu. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again at the Global Hearth, same time next week.